So you are JP Morgan. It's 1912. You own the Titanic, the largest ship ever built, and it's about to set off on its maiden voyage. But at the last minute, you back out. Coincidence, maybe. The fact that some of your biggest opponents are on board ready to disappear into the icy waters of the Atlantic is just a convenient detail. But even though you owned the ship, which sank, it became a lasting pop culture symbol in 1998, immortalized by Jack and Rose. But the Titanic conspiracy is only the surface of a darker story. Because in your time, you were already known as a tycoon who liked to merge companies and form monopolies. Just like you did with West Steel, the world's first billion-dollar company. You were also a man who could save or destroy entire banks with a single signature. A citizen capable of paying another man to fight in the war for you. A civilian who had more power and influence than the elected presidents. So, isn't it an exaggeration to call you the invisible president or king of the United States? And that's where the question arises that spans more than a century. How did you manage to concentrate so much power? How did one man fund a whole country and elevate the United States in capitalism, not just in the 20th century, but also in the 21st century? Since the bank that bears his name is still the largest in the world today? JP Morgan didn't start from scratch, unlike Carnegie and Rockefeller who did. Morgan was born into a comfortable cradle. His father, Junius Morgan, was a banker in London. From a young age, the son was trained to navigate global finance's turbulent seas. While Carnegie built steel empires and Rockefeller monopolized oil, Morgan grasped something deeper. The real power wasn't in owning refineries or steel mills, but in controlling credit, the credit that made all of this work. So he was on the side of the game, on the side of those who allow every great idea to leave the drawing board and become reality. The banks. For Morgan, trust was the ultimate currency, and with it, he financed railroads, industries, and governments. Thus was born the reputation of a man who turned chaos into order, the banker who not only invested but decided the fate of an entire nation. And that power would soon be tested in the wildest field of the American economy. The railroads. At the end of the 19th century, the railroads were the nervous system of the United States. But the industry was chaotic. Rival companies fought over routes, fares plummeted, and financial crises arose one after another. That's when Morgan established himself as the organizer. He brought executives together, wiped out debts, forced mergers, and above all, imposed discipline. Those who accepted his terms survived. Those who didn't were crushed. This process gave rise to what Congress would call the money trust, an invisible web of banks, insurance companies, and industries, all orbiting around power. Morgan, unlike Rockefeller, who displayed his monopoly in barrels of oil, had an invisible monopoly. It was in the boards, the stocks, and the debts that he controlled. But this invisible power would be laid bare in 1907 when the American economy plunged into panic. Thomas Jefferson had already warned, banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. It was a warning that had been ignored, but now it took shape in the face of a single man, JP Morgan. From independence until then, the United States had two central banks. Despite the name Bank of the United States, private capital dominated these institutions. Andrew Jackson, the 7th United States president, called bankers a nest of vipers when he destroyed the Second Bank of the United States in 1834. But in 1907, it seemed that the vipers had returned but now concentrated in a single banker. That year, Wall Street collapsed, stocks plummeting, crowds in bank runs, people, businesses, and banks going bankrupt. The scene was one of panic, and the President of the United States was powerless. Then JP Morgan took control. In his library in New York, he locked up industrial bankers until they agreed to finance bailouts and mergers. He examined balance sheets one by one, decided which banks would live and which would die. That night, an unelected civilian ruled the United States. The press called him the savior, but others saw the danger. The fate of a nation's economy was in the hands of a single man. And it was from this fear that the political drive was born to create a new and extremely powerful institution. And obviously, JP Morgan didn't want to be left out of it. In April 1912, the world was thrilled by the Titanic, the largest ship on the planet. At the time, JP Morgan owned the company that operated the ocean liner. His luxury suite was already reserved, but at the last minute, supposedly due to health problems, he decided not to board when the ship sank. Among the dead were names like John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus, all millionaires, influential, and all identified as opponents of the creation of a private central bank in the United States. For many, the tragedy seemed to have removed the last obstacles to Morgan's plan. Coincidence or not, the myth persisted. The Titanic not only marked an era, but also became intertwined with the birth of the Federal Reserve. And a few years later, the conspiracy would become reality and institutionalized on a remote island called Jekyll Island. It wasn't just a conspiracy theory. Senators like Robert Lafayette denounced that the money trust dominated the country. And Charles Lindbergh Sr. would call the Federal Reserve the greatest monopoly on earth. To them, Morgan was not just a banker, he was the architect of an invisible empire. The Panic of 1907 made it clear that the United States needed a financial authority, but how could it be created? In 1886, Jekyll Island was purchased by JP Morgan and his associates, and later it would be the place where this financial authority would be born. The island was initially turned into a holiday resort frequented by the country's leading families. Among the club's members were prominent figures such as Morgan himself, William Vanderbilt, and William Rockefeller. In 1907 and 1904, Mansey's magazine called the Jekyll Island Club the richest, most exclusive, and most inaccessible club in the world. Under the cover of night and using only their first names to keep their identities secret, in 1910, a select group gathered on Jekyll Island to conceptualize a federal banking system, and together the group drafted what is now the Federal Reserve. There were politicians like Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was none other than the father-in-law of Rockefeller Jr., and bankers like Henry Davison and Benjamin Strong, both associated with J.P. Morgan. But among them, there was also a man who would completely change the interpretation of this story. Paul Warburg, a banker of German origin who had become a partner at Kuhn Loeb & Co., an institution with deep ties to the Rothschild dynasty in Europe. And it doesn't stop there. Morgan, though regarded as the great American banker, still relied on credit from London and Paris financial houses, many influenced by the Rothschilds. That's why critics argue that the Federal Reserve was not just an American project, but rather the consolidation of an international cartel of bankers who managed to place the American currency under the orbit of private global interests. In the official narrative, the Fed was created to protect the United States from crises as a lender of last resort. In practice, it felt like they gave control of the country's economy to a few men from the global banking elite. Conspiracy theory? You tell me, but the result was clear. In 1913, America got a new central bank and lost direct control over its own currency. J.P. Morgan died that same year in Rome, but his logic of control ultimately prevailed. The system he used to control a loan now became a permanent institution. But the influence of the House of Morgan wouldn't die with its founder. On the contrary, during World War I, it would become the financial arm of American foreign policy.
power of money attacks the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. Power of the nation. Times conspires times the nation times and conspires in
the power class for conspires against her delay differentiated the times peace and conspires delayed times conspires in the differentiated. This is weakened. What is zumublicus, are you? I want to see a meaning of faces, and one of the most unbelievable facts of the time revealed by the family Warburg. In the United States, Paul Warburg, as we have seen, was one of the architects of the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, even joining its board during World War I. On the other side of the Atlantic, his brother, Max Warburg, held a seat at the Reichsbank, the central bank of Germany, financing the war efforts of a direct enemy of the United States. I don't know if you understood, but the same family, two brothers serving countries that were killing each other on the battlefield. For many critics, this was not just a coincidence, but the portrait of what was already being whispered in the corridors of power. That international bankers served no flag, only capital. In 1934, 16 years after World War I, the American Senate launched an investigation called the Merchants of Death. The so-called Senate Munitions Committee emerged due to widespread reports that arms manufacturers had unduly influenced the American decision to enter the war. In 1917, these arms suppliers had made enormous profits at the cost of more than 53,000 American combat deaths. As localized and local conflicts reignited in Europe in the early 1930s, concerns spread that these merchants of death would once again drag the United States into a fight that was none of their business. Senator Gerard Piney at the time promised, "When the Senate investigation is over, we will see that war and preparations for war are not a matter of honor and national defense, but rather a matter of profit for a few." Over the next 18 months, the NAI committee held 93 hearings and questioned over 200 witnesses, including J.P. Morgan Jr. and Pierre DuPont. The investigation ended abruptly and with inconclusive results. But merging the state, military industry and finance would cause resentment, and in the 1930s the inner workings of the Morgan Empire would be exposed to the whole country in another way. The Great Depression of 1929 drove millions into poverty, and popular anger demanded an answer. Then prosecutor Ferdinand Pecora put the Morgans under interrogation. Before the Senate, J.P. Morgan Jr. was humiliated. The hearings revealed privileges, questionable practices, and a financial elite completely disconnected from the people. Pecora made Morgan admit under oath that he avoided paying United States income tax in 1930 and 1931. Evidence also showed Morgan gave preferential stock deals to politicians and public figures from both parties, implying the deals were traded for favors, a clear case of bribery. In addition, the investigation checked internal records and exposed to the public the fact that the partners of Morgan Company controlled another 89 corporations valued at $19 billion. Many Americans were shocked and horrified when they discovered the power and influence over the economy held by one man and the company he led. The result was the Glass-Steagall Act, which separated commercial banks from investment banks. So the House of Morgan was split, but the brand didn't die. On the contrary, it adapted, branched out, and survived as institutions like Morgan Stanley. Decades later, during the 2008 crisis, the Morgan name once again took center stage in the country. A century after the Panic of 1907 and 79 years after the Great Depression of 1929, the United States plunged into a new catastrophe, the subprime crisis. Millions lost their homes, banks went bankrupt, and the financial system was shaking once again. And once again, the name Morgan was at the center. J.P. Morgan Chase, the institutional heir to the empires created by John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, which eventually merged in the 2000s, was called upon to buy failed institutions and provide liquidity to the system. And guess where they got the money to buy, for example, the failed Barry Starners for 30 billion saposis? Exactly from the Federal Reserve. It was the same choreography as in 1907. While politicians hesitated, bankers decided. The ghosts of J.P. Morgan still hovered over every decision. Presidents sign laws, but credit defines the fate of a nation. J.P. Morgan was not elected, but he ruled like few leaders in history. That night in 1907, he showed that he could control the United States from his library. Even after his death, his method lived on, institutionalized in the Federal Reserve and continued by banks still bearing his name. If governing is deciding the fate of millions with a pen, then yes, Invisible President of the United States.
Are you seriously gonna watch this whole video and leave without hitting the like button? Hey, I put a lot of effort into bringing you this content with the best quality possible, so hit the like button now and take the opportunity. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. I'm Marcos, nice to meet you, welcome to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.